Hi, everyone. Welcome to Perfect Prey. I'm so glad you're here. As you know, I am trying really hard to elevate the conversations for children who have suffered abuse in their family system. And we know we have complicit court systems that do not recognize it. We have communities that ignore this type of abuse. And I have David Weeks here today, who is a survivor of horrific abuse carried out by family, medical professionals, and predators from afar. Hi, David. So nice to see you.
So good to see you too.
David, you write that the abuse that would insinuate over the course of 2 decades would involve chronic neglect, social isolation, coercive control, and attempted murder. Starving for attachment, David found someone who fulfilled his needs for love, which quickly turned dark, leading him to be sex trafficked. David was 13 as his abuser was 39. Despite family and professionals knowing nothing was done to protect him, leaving David to be trafficked for many years, labeled autistic by a psychiatrist and developing life altering conditions. David likes to share his story and education on trauma to raise awareness, validate survivors, and protect those who are most vulnerable. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really a gift.
Yeah, well, thank you. I am so honored that you're willing to share your story so openly. I think before the call, we were talking about how this is something abusers hope that we retain secrecy, don't they? And, your willingness to talk out, but also to be a young man talking out about this when we know so many young boys suffer abuse just as so many young girls do. So thank you for being willing to do that.
Yes, like I say, abuse thrives in silence. As soon as we break that silence, it's when everything becomes exposed.
Mhm. Absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit about your family system? Because it feels to me like we're going to hear a story of significant neglect and harm. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, the abuse started really when I was 4. That's the first memory I have. It was my father. We were in this big black SUV going down the neighborhood and start crying for whatever reason. He takes me back to the house and says to my mom, I can't deal with him anymore. And I just, like, go to the couch, have my warm strawberry milk that I always had to have, and just heard my grandma and mom have this intense conversation in the kitchen. I just knew to, like, freeze like a statue, and I think that really, started everything for me of, like, feeling something's wrong with me. And my father soon would leave my mom, and my mom would quickly marry our next door neighbor, my stepfather, who I'm convinced he's antisocial. Like, he's never once said, I love you, never once shown emotion, very callous, manipulative person. And like, we've never connected. Even when I was little, I just felt this evil, something wasn't right. And so he eventually goes on deployment because he's in the military, and I become the man of the house. I was very sick. I was having epilepsy. My longest seizure was 7 minutes. But like, I think that's partially because of how traumatized I was. I would have dinner dates with my mom, even though my sisters didn't have them. I would be cuddling with my mom at night in her bedroom, even though at times it felt very uncomfortable. Looking at it now, I felt more like her boyfriend than a son.
Mhm.
And, recently doing EMDR, I've had memories of even showering with her as a kid. And just that intense level of specialness, and, like, my sisters saw that, and they really much resented me for it, and I didn't like that because I'm, to this day, someone who likes everyone just to get along. My stepfather eventually came back, and I was immediately discarded and was no longer seen in the same lens, and we didn't really have dinner dates anymore. I was like, I kinda didn't exist to my mom anymore.
So you went from being super special, the golden child,
Yes,
to being nothing, to being,
yes.
yeah. Hmm.
My growing up was like walking on unexploding bombs, never knowing what would set them off. Like, I couldn't know if it was gonna be a good day or a bad day by simply them walking up the stairs in the front door. If I, like, needed to shapeshift, if I needed to dissociate, if I needed to be what I had to be. I feel like I was many parts to a lot of different people, and I never got to develop a really sense of self because it wasn't safe to. My stepfather would yell at us until our ears would ring. He would slam doors. He would clean his guns in front of us. He would degrade my mom, and I didn't like how he treated my mom. very disrespectful. Like, he never hit her, he just put her down, minimized her, and my mom was abused as a kid too, and so my mom was abused as a kid, my grandma on my mom's side was abused as a kid, and my grandma on my father's side was abused as a kid, so there's a lot of abuse in my family. The court system came, and I grew up in a very messy divorce. My mom drained my father's assets, and we would get custody. We did the child pass along, which to me is very destabilizing. It was always destabilizing. I hated it. I would see my dad on the weekends, my mom get us during the week, and my father eventually marries this person. I won't say her name, but like marries his new family. And me and my sister also did not like her. So we felt something was wrong there. But her kids were so sweet. And her one kid, was very much a mother figure to me and very much nurtured me.
Mm,
And even though she was 17, I feel like she saw how much I was going through. My father, would take us to my grandma's in Smith Mountain Lake and, paint a picture. My dad's side of the family was what can we do for the kids? While my mom's side of the family is what can kids do for us?
ah,
And, so if I wanted to bake a cake, 5 in the morning, we baked the cake at 5 in the morning with my grandma, and, everything kinda took a turn when I was in 3rd grade. We went to go see Megamind. I remember the memory very distinctly, and, we come back, my mom gets this phone call a few minutes later, and I could tell by the tone of her voice that it wasn't good. So she calls us down and tells us, "Your father was just arrested for wanting to hire a hitman to kill you and your sister." And, I was 9. And I can trace back to when my major depressive disorder started, and that's when it really started. I would cry during random times of the day.
oh,
My teachers would have to calm me down in recess. I knew at some aspect my mom was lying,
okay.
but I also was like, "I'm not safe."
So it wasn't true.
No. It took me over a decade to find the truth of what actually happened,
So she
and
did it to attempt to fracture your attachment
yeah.
with him.
My
Right.
father actually was arrested, but it was for something different related to, his
Oh
family
my
he just married
gosh.
into.
This is, I mean, how horrifying that your
Yeah,
mother would do that.
and that's when the social isolation really started. The family I just told you about, one day I'm seeing them, next day I don't see them ever again, and very destabilizing. I took me over 10 years to see my grandma on my dad's side and my cousins, and, they missed out on a lot of milestones in my life. It wasn't until, in my 20s I saw my grandma again, and
So,
unfortunately, my grandfather passed away from Parkinson's, so I never
so your
got to
mom
see him.
didn't allow you to have access to that side of the family either. This is an example of, right? Okay.
Yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but yeah, like, so then it's the isolation you started with that word is 100% like it just sounds like she just took everything away that mattered to you
yeah,
guys. Hmm. Yeah.
and, my grandma would send us cards, and she would intercept them and, throw them away,
Mhm.
and my grandma would call us and tell us about the cards, and we would say, "No, I didn't see it," and she knew my mom was intercepting them.
Mhm.
Um, I remember vividly back, when I was in Smith Mountain Lake, there was this one time where, it was time to go home, and I didn't wanna go. I was, like, trying to sink into the recliner saying, "Don't take me home, don't take me home, I don't wanna go home," and my grandma just thought, it's a typical boy, he doesn't wanna leave his grandmother's, right? My sister comes and says, "Now, David, mom still loves you." And she was like, "What is going on in this house?" That happened. My medications would be changed. Anytime I misbehaved, they would be changed. By the age of 10, I was on 200 milligrams of sertraline and 60 milligrams of Vyvanse.
Wow.
And, so much so that I was having heart palpitations, I was having tremors. It felt like I was consuming, like, 70 Red Bulls, like, it felt like my heart was going to explode. And even if I wanted to cry, I couldn't because of the medication. So, like, I became completely robotic to my mom, what she wanted. My mom would tear apart my body. It was, "Your voice sounds like Squidward," or Your hair looks like the weatherman on the news channel. You have thunder thighs. You're husky, or you need to be more of a man. Or she would be like, "Hey, Eeyore," because I would have like my blanket that I'll carry with me. Just very awful, awful things. No one loves you. Like you need me more than I need you, and if you don't like it, leave.
Mhm,
And so I was like, it's not like I can go on a train and leave. I had to assimilate to the abuse. I started puberty at the age of 7. Was never put on hormone blockers, was never done anything about it. So I was very much, rapidly going through puberty
it's very
and
young.
very young. I was having, pubic hair at 8, leg hair by, like, 9, very, very fast, and I had to teach myself how to be a man because my stepfather didn't want to. So, when I was in sex ed, I was like, I already learned that, like, 2 years ago because I taught myself that, like,
Mhm.
very being adaptive, very, chameleon growing up.
Well, I think if I could just
Yeah,
summarize what I hear is almost like a lost boy, like somebody in a home where he doesn't even feel like he belongs.
yeah,
He's not getting unconditional love and positive regard. It's like you're a nuisance and will medicate you to calm you down or whatever it is, anything to keep you more sedated or, obviously not loved.
yeah.
I mean,
I remember wanting my mom to throw the ball to me and she being too busy. It was, "I'm watching TV right now, what do you want?" Meanwhile, like, she's a teacher, my stepfather is this American veteran, like, no one's gonna question the white picket fence. At times, I had as much as a crown like, a coloring crown maker that came out, the TV, and a coloring book to entertain myself. That's what I had. I didn't really have friends because I was just so terrified. The friendships I did have were very hot and cold, so one minute they wanted to be my friend, the next they didn't, and I would, be writing to them, like, "Please don't leave me," which just infuriated the trauma bond that I developed even more so. And when I was about 12, I was watching this rated R movie with my parents, still very young. There was a sex scene in it. I didn't know what a sex scene was, and, of course, as every 12-year-old boy, I looked up, "What's a sex tape?" And loads of pornography start coming up, and I was like, "Well, what's this?" Now I'm heavily watching porn, and I'm thinking, people who love each other have sex. So I was thinking all these people love each other and not understanding at all what's happening. And again, like I was having emotions of an 18-year-old that wasn't mature for my age because I was just so far along with
right.
puberty.
And nobody took the time, which sadly happens all too frequently where parents don't take the time to discuss all of this so that when children do get exposed to it, it's not unaware for them. They actually have an awareness, but you had none, got thrown
Uh,
into it.
so like it really much became a perfect storm of never being good enough, having my body eviscerated by my mom and put back together. At 12, I was put on a diet by my mom. I did quickly developed anorexia nervosa with bulimia characteristics. And I start talking to these people online, and they were telling me everything I wanted to hear from my parents so badly, that I looked good, that my thighs do look good, that I am, manly and whatnot. And one time, this guy picked me up. He gained my trust over, a course of a few weeks, and he convinced me to take me out of my house. And I snuck out of my house, and I didn't really think we would have sex, but, like, I feel like it crossed my mind, but also at the same time, I'm like, people who love each other have sex. We get to his house and he puts his hand on my thigh, and I'm just like, feel the seatbelt immediately, like, digging into my skin. And he, like, takes me into his house, smells completely of alcohol and cigarettes, very pungent, starts to unclothe me. I'm, like, shaking, visibly shaking at this point, and, he assaults me in his bedroom. And I thought, like, it felt very, very bad. And I told him how bad it felt, and he normalized it for me. He was like,
Mm.
"Well, it's normal to, to feel uncomfortable the first time you have sex." And as a 13-year-old boy, and I'm like, the cognitive dissonance, I'm like, "Well, I guess that kinda makes sense."
No recognition, of course, at 13 that this person is totally not engaged in any kind of consent and that you don't have the ability to give consent at 13 years old.
it would go on for many, many years. The rape would last hours at a time. Would happen a few times a week. I very much felt like a sex toy at times, the amount of how many people I would have sex with, and there are times where, like, it felt nice to have sex because of, like, it felt like, "This feels good," but sometimes I was terrified, and I wanted to say no, but I was like, "Okay, if I say no, what's gonna happen? Are they
Mhm.
gonna actually, like, physically hurt me?"
So if I can, I'm just thinking about, like, it's the threat of the unknown. There's always this intimidation, but you don't know what it is, but you're a child first of all, right? But there's power. So this relates back to, this platform is about coercive control. And I think that not all coercive controllers are pedophiles, but all pedophiles and hebephiles, people who are attracted to a little bit more of the older age range, are coercive controllers. They're using the same exact grooming techniques to engage people into a relationship, and oftentimes it starts off with something good or positive. You take a young boy who hasn't felt loved, and sometimes there's a need that's fulfilled there, whether right? So, for my listeners, I just want to, this is not our typical content, but it really is very valuable to understand that our children are at risk and that these individuals are going to they do such a really good job, right? They show up as someone who you would trust, who you would think is okay. As a matter of fact, 93% of offenders are known to children. So you knew him even if you had only met him online. You knew him, and that's what he did. And there was an enticing and it's just, it's absolutely heartbreaking that this is a problem that we actually have in our world, is what I would say.
And, like, what's more mind-blowing is my parents knew about it.
Okay.
My therapist knew about it. My psychiatrist knew about it. My doctors knew about it. Nothing was reported. Nothing was
How did
documented.
they all knew about it and didn't report it?
Yeah. I have a feeling it's because I'm a boy and somehow it's my fault that I brought this on myself.
That's horrific, though.
Yeah.
Even, I mean, the fact that there were
And I
all of those
remember,
adults.
yeah, it wasn't just, I wasn't just failed by my family, I was failed by the entire system.
Yeah,
And I remember my psychiatrist particularly shaming me for it. And, saying, if you're my kid, that, like, this would never happen. I can't believe, you would even think this is okay to treat your parents. And I'm 15 and I don't even have I just know that, like, if I don't have sex with these people, like, it became to the point where, like, it physically felt painful if I didn't have sex. Like, I was just so brainwashed to it.
sure, sure.
And I was labeled as autistic. My mom wanted me to fix me.
Mm,
I would go to these different psychiatrists. I was evaluated probably 4 times, and the one she found me, I was in ninth grade. I knew I didn't have autism. She gave me the diagnosis of autism, and, it's feeling so small of, like, why does no one see me? I say this it was really hard for me to identify as the sexual abuse as abuse because it wasn't as bad as I was receiving at home. And at some level, it made me felt worthy of a human being, that someone wanted me for just 10 seconds.
You're speaking directly to this idea that we all assume that children, um, have bad experiences when they're sexually assaulted. And the reality is there's a lot of good feelings that can come up, and that is unfortunately, the other layer of shame, right? And I appreciate the fact that you just said that. It's bringing a little tears to my eyes because, there's a world of children who are experiencing this. 1 in 3 girls before the age of 18, 1 in 6 boys before the age of 18 will be sexually abused. And, they are living in a place of well, maybe this felt good, or at least this relationship with this person is a relationship that feels good, right? Whether the sexual part of it feels good or not. how harmful abusers are is all I can say. It's just absolutely astounding that there are people in the world who I mean, again, we can talk about pathology, but these are people who truly have no regard for another human being and their wellness.
And, like, my parents knew about it too, and they would punish me for it. There was like, "I'm gonna lose my job as a teacher, your father's gonna lose his security clearance, you're gonna break this family apart, it's all gonna be because of you." And I would be grounded for, like, 6 months to a year at a time, which made the trafficking even worse because I would run to them more for protection and safety and connection, and, everything I did, you know, everything I wore had to be approved by my mom. Everything that I ate had to be approved by my mom. My hair, styles was even, like, had to be okayed by her. Every part of me was controlled. I was tracked, and there was cameras all in the house, and so, like, they would know what I was doing in the kitchen because there was a camera right there.
You're speaking to this idea that there is a parenting style and abusers use it all the time that's authoritarian,
Yeah,
right? And so rather than connecting with David and making David feel loved and supported, they chose to control you, which of course oftentimes is exactly what happens. Children run from that, right? Or any adult, will try to run from that versus connection. But in general, we know that children know they're not safe in that environment. You didn't go someplace safer, you went to someplace that felt more safe than where you were.
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
And, unfortunately, like, the abuse did not stop there. Went of course, we turn 18. It's not like, these patterns automatically, like, poof, go away when we hit a certain age. And I was stealthed in college, and it's when someone either damages a condom or removes a condom, and I contracted HIV and Hep C. So, yeah, that I found that out when I was 19.
Living with HIV.
Yes.
Mhm.
And I found out because I was actually going to get tested to go on PrEP, and I just learned about HIV in my cellular microbiome class. I just did a project on it, so I knew everything about it, and I had it, like, 2 weeks later, I tested positive for it, and my mom told me, "This affects me more than it'll ever affect you." She told my whole family without my consent, and I knew I shouldn't have told her. I just wanted a mother's love so badly.
Mhm.
And that, like, I just wanted my mom to hold me. So I was like I told my doctor it was okay to go tell her, and something I regret.
Sure. You're hopeful, right? And those are like we retain hope even in the worst of circumstances. We think people are going to be better, even though they've shown us over and over again. And of course, a child with their parent. I mean, of course. I mean, first of all, I'm so grateful that you're willing to share your story because when you share, other people will be willing. I think you probably know that a little bit about me, right? Like
Mhm.
I'm pretty open about my story, and
Yes.
because some people can't speak up, some
Yes.
people can't.
That's why I do it.
That's right. And I think you're probably finding, I know you are, that people are so appreciative of it and feeling so less isolated, and just knowing you're not alone is sometimes, I always say, like, you can get the best therapy. You can get EMDR and
Mhm.
DBT and, neurofeedback and all of these things, but none of that is relevant until someone's actually heard you. And
Yes.
someone till someone has actually said, "Oh my gosh, I hear you. I can feel that experience through you." And I think that just by sharing your story, you're able to do that for so many people, for so many people. I
Thank you.
appreciate it.
And, I would say, I call it the awakening, right? I was dating the same person, but different faces, who was very abusive, who would hit me, degrade me. I eventually found a terrific woman named Dr. Romany, and my whole life came into color. I was like, "This isn't my fault." I was raised by a narcissistic mother, and I was already taking, psych classes at this time in university, and I was like, "Holy cow." There was no unseeing it, and I escaped from my family. I took 49 credits within a year while doing research, and I graduated a year early,
That's amazing.
and I started my master's degree. I moved 1,000 miles away from my family. I started my master's at 21.
Amazing, David. It's beautiful. And you know that I've been on Dr. Ramani's podcast and on her network, and I sent her a letter at about 2018 to tell her how she saved my life. So she has brought about an awareness that so many of us could not have even imagined, right?
Yes.
And so I appreciate you sharing that, but I think there's probably a gazillion other people who have the same exact sentiment you do. Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah,
Uh,
very much so. So we are so lucky to have that information out there today and to again know you're not alone and it's not you, as her book says, it's right there on
really
the
not. Yeah.
table. It's not you. And I want to point out before we finish up because we're just about out of time, but that I hear that your mom was extremely abusive and there's no diminishing that. But I also hear you had men in your life too who just really did not do what every child needs. And I think the important messaging here is, Bell Hooks has a wonderful quote. I wish I had had it out for tonight, but basically, what she talks about is that the world that boys are born into and groomed into is a world that attacked by other men. That the first attack to a young boy is by other men, other boys who make him feel like showing that vulnerability is a weakness. And then what happens is many boys then begin to shut that down, right? And not show their vulnerability. And what you're doing is saying, F that, I am showing it and I am letting everybody see it. And it's honestly, I don't want to be patronizing, but I'm super happy that you are in this world doing this work. Really,
Thank you.
very much so.
Thank you. I really want to break the stigma for men. On average, it'll take 20 years for a man to disclose what happened to him and 30 years to go into detail, with most men never even speaking about it. And this is why suicide rates between the ages 18 and 45 for men continue to be one of the number one causes of death for men, because we don't have an outlet. We have alcohol and sex as our safety blankets. I think more than 1 in 6, because in some capacity, boys become the perfect victims because the perpetrator knows they're never going to tell because of the stigma. And they know if they do say anything, they're not going to be believed.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's probably more than 1 in 3 girls and definitely more than 1 in 6 boys,
Yeah.
for sure. Those are the stats of the reported cases.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's so many more. The more that you're in the social media world as you are, and the more that you're aware, it's around every corner. It's literally very prevalent. And so, those of you listening, thank you so much for staying on. I know this was an overwhelmingly maybe triggering episode for some people. And I always give a trigger warning before the episode, but also educate your children and hold them tight and connect with them so that they always know that they can lean on you when they're feeling unsafe. Thank you so much, David, for being here.
Thank you. And for those who are listening, it's not your fault. Like, it's really not. These are people who had something going on with them. It's not you.
It's not you. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Free audio post production by alphonic.com.